What's new from Apple? There's the new iPhone 16 Pro, built for Apple Intelligence. And it comes with the all-new camera control, giving you an easier way to quickly access your camera tools. The new Apple Watch Series 10 has our biggest display and our thinnest design ever. And this? It's the sound of active noise cancellation, now available on one of 2 new AirPods 4 models. So quiet. Check out all of the new products and new features at apple.com. You can even buy yourself something new. See apple.com for product availability updates. Apple Intelligence coming this fall.
Recent polling shows that Oregonians have a lot in common with the rest of the country in one major way. We're pretty pessimistic about the local economy. But if you look at the numbers, things are actually going pretty well. Inflation is falling, wages are up, unemployment is near historic lows. So why is there such a big contrast between how we feel and what economists say is actually going on? Today on CityCast Portland, Oregon tech and economy reporter Mike Rogoway is walking us through the cross-currents of our state's economy right now and how our perceptions could impact the upcoming election. It's Wednesday, September 11th. I'm John Notarianni, in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. You study Oregon's economy for a living, so I'm wondering, do you have any good economist jokes? I'm sure you must have one.
Well, I think it's Harry Truman's joke that he says he wished for a one-handed economist because the economists always say on the one hand and then on the other hand. And I don't know that that's a good joke, but that's where they always go. And I think, throughout the post-pandemic recovery, that's been where economists have been. They've always said, well, the numbers look good, but, there's all these signs, the inverted yield curve and yada, yada, that we're maybe headed into a recession.
Well, I'm sure you talk to economists in your reporting all the time. But if we were to ask an economist how the state is doing right now, what would they say? What numbers would they point to?
Well, this is a good question and a timely one because the state economists have just issued their quarterly forecast, and they have given us one of these on the one hand, on the other hand,
there we go.
Kinds of answers. And they say, well, employment and wages are still growing. Wages are growing a little faster than inflation. Inflation is down. Oregon productivity is up, which may reflect the fact that our job growth hasn't been quite as good as some other states, but yet our economic output has continued to be good. The unemployment rate is low, 4.1%. And there are some signals that suggest that things might be picking up a little bit. On the other hand, they would say that the labor market, in fact, they did say the labor market is softer than it appears. There's a couple benchmarks they would point to. One we'll take is job vacancies, which are still relatively high by historical standards, but have fallen by 40% from the pandemic's peak and continue to be falling. There's fewer job openings in Oregon every quarter than there were the quarter before. There is some sign of wage growth slowing. There are lots of signs that employers are choosing to leave vacancies open rather than fill them. And the amount of time people are spending on unemployment insurance when they do get laid off is longer. And the rate at which people are on unemployment for the full 26 weeks before it expires, that's gone up to around 30%, which is actually higher than it was before the pandemic, which suggests that our economy maybe isn't quite as good as it was in that period of time, which was a really robust economy. Really from 2015, 2016 on till the pandemic, things were really strong in Oregon.
So the bottom line is we're doing better than the last couple years, not quite as hot as we were maybe a decade ago.
Yeah, I think so. By historical standards, this is a good labor market, but there are things creeping around the edges that make people scratch their heads and wonder, which way things could go.
Yeah, and I think a lot of families don't decide how they feel about the economy by historical standards.
No, it's how they feel right now.
Yeah. There also have been a lot of challenges facing some of our state's marquee industries, right? Intel's been making headlines, Nike's been making headlines, the timber industry, they've all had some pretty rough news stories in the last couple months. How are things looking today, I guess, in those big three industries?
Not good.
Okay, well,
And the state economist raised this. The Intel is the main focus of my work. That's mostly what I do, and it is in fact probably the largest single economic engine in the state.
And what is going on with Intel? So full disclosure, we do a Friday roundup every Friday. And last week I was like, I'm going to talk about Intel. And I started reading into it and we were all just like, I don't understand what's going on here. What's going on?
Well, the fundamental issue is that the cost structure of making semiconductors is really high. It costs tens of billions of dollars to build and equip these factories that they call fabs. Mm-hmm. And, that's great for Oregon, or always has been for the past 4 decades or so, because that's money that pours into Oregon's economy. But if you're going to pay for all that, you have to generate high revenues. Intel has committed to a lot of spending to build new advanced factories in other parts of the United States and to upgrade its factories here in Oregon. But its revenues have fallen from 70 billion some 2 years ago to 50 billion some now, and they don't have a lot of prospect of increasing. Intel has 2 fundamental issues. They are still engineering chips for the central processing unit. These are the brains of our laptops and data centers. What everyone wants now is a more advanced chip for artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Intel doesn't play in that game. They have some AI capabilities on their PCs, but not the really workhorse stuff that their rival NVIDIA has. Mm-hmm. And so that side of Intel's business, the engineering business, is really struggling. The other half of their business, their manufacturing business, is struggling in its own way. It had a series of technological lapses at the end of the 2010s. They've made up a lot of that, and they want to start contracting with other companies to make their chips, because they say now we have advanced factories, they're comparable to what our rivals offer. But they haven't been able to drum up any business for that. Their only real customer is themselves, Intel.
So Intel's two-handed economist is, on one hand, this side of the business sucks. On the other hand, this side of the business isn't taking off the way we hoped.
Exactly. And Intel is probably facing something like an existential crisis right now.
And it's worth pointing out, in case it's not clear, it's not based in Oregon, but has like a huge hub in the Portland area.
Yeah, this is their largest base of operations anywhere. They employ more Oregonians than any other business does, around 23,000. They're in the process of laying off 15,000 across the company. Mm-hmm. If that's proportionate, it'd probably be a few thousand jobs that we lose here in Oregon.
And do we have any sense of that yet, or is that still to be determined?
We'll have a clear sense a month from now.
Okay.
They're sort of lining up their ducks. What they did first was voluntary buyouts, and that process is complete. The folks I know at Intel say that a lot of people took the buyouts, but not nearly enough to cover it. So there's going to have to be layoffs.
Yeah.
And it's a bad scene. And so, we'll feel that for sure. Our economy will feel that. And if Intel's problems continue, we'll feel that.
Yeah. How about Nike? Looking better or worse than Intel?
Yeah. Well, they're better, but it's a low bar. My colleague Matt Kish covers them and covers them quite thoroughly. They again have multiple issues. We'll say 2 broad ones. Their sort of go-to-market strategy on where they sell their shoes failed. They had a new CEO who had an idea that they would sell more direct to customers, perhaps in the model of Apple, we'll say. And Apple CEO Tim Cook is on Nike's board. Nike CEO John Donahoe is a former tech executive, tech investor. This is the world he knows. It didn't work. People want shoes in Foot Locker. They want shoes in Nordstrom. They want them in Macy's, even though those chains are struggling a little bit. They're sort of moving back that way now. But the other is, I think that probably Nike has neglected its core runner market. And there's other brands coming up like Hoka and On that are taking some of Nike's market share.
Yeah.
And Nike still has an incredibly strong brand, but they've laid off 700 some in Oregon this year. They're repositioning. I mean, they're not facing an existential crisis, but they are doing a strategic rethinking.
Yeah, and the third component that we brought up was the timber industry. Obviously kind of a different situation. Legacy industry, been around forever. What Oregon was built on by certain mindsets. Not doing so great. What's going on there?
No, timber, obviously is, as you say, it was what Oregon was built on, but it's been 30, 40 years since it was, one of Oregon's real main industries. But in parts of the state, they remain very, very important. And so we have little mills shutting down all across the state. And altogether, they've laid off about 500 people over the course of the last year, which is not a large number in a state with 2 million jobs. But it is a very large number in these small communities. And these are communities that have been struggling for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And what I'm hearing from the mills, there's a combination of factors. They've been concerned for many, many years about timber supply. Environmental restrictions, land use restrictions have limited the amount of logs that are available to them. But it's far more than that now. The market is poor, operating costs are higher because of inflation. And this is an interesting one. In some of these small communities, a lot of young people have moved on. They say they're having trouble finding drug-free workers. And I think what we're seeing are the social problems that followed the economic problems in these social communities have sort of metastasized.
Yeah.
And, there may be jobs for the relatively small number of people still living in these communities, but the conditions of living in some of these places have been very difficult.
And I think the timber industry especially is such an important symbolic industry for rural Oregon. Think a couple years back when there was a major sort of organized push against urban democratic control in the state, the group was called Timber Unity.
It's tough. And it's an industry that's still very important to the state and extremely important to parts of the state. So,
yeah, well, I want to talk a little bit about how all of this funnels into the vibes of how people feel about the economy. But before we get there, let's take a quick break. You've probably all seen the news by now about rising energy costs, right? It might be time to think about an alternative. So here's a few options. One, you could design your own plutonium-fueled nuclear reactor, Back to the Future style, or you could just take advantage of the biggest fuel source in the solar system. Yeah, I'm talking about the sun. Solar panels can power your home with clean, renewable energy while also shrinking your bills and reducing your impact on the environment. And with smart battery storage, solar does even more. Like during power outages, you're going to have backup power for stuff like keeping your lights on and your refrigerator running. But the best news is that solar energy and battery storage qualify for cash incentives from Energy Trust of Oregon and a 30% federal tax credit. That means you could save thousands of dollars. Now, if you're not familiar, Energy Trust is an independent nonprofit organization that helps people and organizations save energy and adopt clean energy solutions. And the best way to get started with solar plus storage is to just request a free, no-obligation bid from an Energy Trust solar trade ally at energytrust.org/citycast. Hey, it's John from CityCast Portland. Let's face it, sometimes bad stuff happens. A serious injury, a catastrophic accident, even a wrongful death. It can really turn your world upside down. And when it does, you deserve unwavering support from a dedicated team. Yeah, you need a lawyer. D'Amour Law Group has over 30 years of experience protecting the rights of Oregonians. Their team of skilled attorneys, led by the renowned trial lawyer Tom D'Amour, will work tirelessly to make sure your voice is heard and your rights are protected. Here's what one of his clients said. Tom fights for his clients from the first day they meet him through the last day of trial. So if you need help holding those responsible for your injuries accountable, contact D'Amour Law Group at 503-222-6333 or visit d'amourlaw.com to schedule a free consultation. They're committed to fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve right here in Portland. Okay, we read the headlines about Intel and we say, I don't understand what's going on, but it seems not good. Like we read the headlines about Nike and the timber industry and it feels like doom and gloom. But is it rational to worry about these individual industries or businesses as a bellwether or a proxy for the entire state economy? Or are we making a mistake when we do that?
Well, compare us to Seattle, for example. In Seattle, you have Boeing's having a hard time. Nordstrom's having a hard time, but there's also Costco, Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks. Yeah. Starbucks is kind of having a hard time, but there are many pieces of the economy in Washington's economic center. Oregon's economic center doesn't have as many. So we are more concentrated and we are more vulnerable when a big industry hurts. And Portland has other draws. We obviously have great food, wine, beer, coffee. The view is fantastic. It's wonderful here. Yeah. But tourism is way down. We had suffered a lot of what economists call reputational damage in the pandemic and its aftermath. And people are not coming as much as they were. And so we don't have a lot else going for us other than our anchor industries and the fact that this is a good place to draw people to. So
I feel like I want to argue with you. I kind of want to be like, no, there's tons of great stuff in Oregon. And I'm like, like beer and coffee and great views. Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason we're here, you and I. Sure. It is a great place to be in many ways. But one of the big demographic challenges we have is we're the oldest state west of the Mississippi. And it doesn't feel that way. Portland's supposed to be where young people go to retire, and maybe Portland is, but as a state, we're older.
So surprising when someone says that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, but it's true. The people who track migration say people are still moving into Oregon at roughly the same rate they were before the pandemic, but we're not having many kids. We're dying. We have more deaths than we do births. And we need more migration here to make up for what we're losing. And if we don't have the industries to provide that, it's a bit of a trick.
Well, last month you wrote about some new polling that came out of DHM research that found, surprise, a lot of Oregonians are actually pretty pessimistic about the economy right now. Why do you think people are so cynical? What did you see in this polling?
Yeah, DHM runs sort of regular surveys to kind of take the temperature. And going into the pandemic, people were generally feeling pretty good. But it's been stubbornly bad after that. We did have something like an economic boom after the pandemic. And I think, bottom line is its cost. DHM asked, what do you think shapes your view of the economy? And in general, 54% of people think the economy is some variation of poor. And, what do they see as the big issues? Far and away, it's housing. Rents haven't risen that much since the pandemic, but they were relatively high compared to wages in Oregon beforehand. And then you have rising interest rates, and it's hard to afford a home.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's surprising for me to hear, because when I think about the pandemic, I think about this era of runaway housing prices in Oregon, where it seemed like the cost of buying a house went up and up and up. So I just assumed that rent was going up at the same rate, but maybe that's not the case?
Well, home prices did, but rental prices didn't go up nearly as much, and that's a migration issue.
Yeah,
that's the demographic thing that we were talking about a moment ago. We haven't had as many people moving in, but we did have some housing construction in the pipeline going into the pandemic, and that construction is falling off now because of interest rates, because of Portland's reputational damage. But come into the pandemic and its immediate aftermath, we had a lot of housing built in this area, so that helped put a lid on rents. But the cost of buying a home, which is what many people aspire to and what most people have done in Oregon, the interest rates make that very tough. And, cost of groceries is number 2 on the list. People feel that very acutely. And yes, the edge is off inflation. The big price spikes that we saw in 2022 and parts of 2023 is close to historical norms and the Fed's target. But prices don't go down after that. And so people can still remember, a loaf of Fran's bread was $2.50 before the pandemic, and now they want more than $5 for it. They feel that quite acutely. And maybe they're, in aggregate, wages have increased more than prices. But people earn their wage increase. They didn't earn their price increase. Yeah. So that stings. They feel rightly that they've done their jobs and they've earned a higher pay. They didn't do anything to deserve the higher bread prices. They didn't do anything to deserve paying more for milk. And so you want to get ahead, and it's hard.
It's also just interesting thinking back to like the, for lack of a better term, like Portlandia era Portland,
Yeah.
the time when like everything was great and Portland was just this sort of like great place to live. And it just seems so much like that sentiment has changed. Is that us just being precious? Like, are we being nostalgic about that, or do the economic numbers really bear that out?
I think that bear that out. There was sort of a happy Goldilocks moment when before the biggest rent increases had kicked in, before the cost of buying a home had really climbed, but it still had all the things that we like about living here in terms of the climate, in terms of the natural amenities, in terms of the food, wine, coffee, beer, all those things were here. So it had everything you want, and it still wasn't so expensive that if you were an artist or a more offbeat individual who didn't want to do the corporate 9 to 5 and maximize your income, you could still afford to live here. You still can't afford to live here. We're far more affordable than other West Coast cities, but we're not the bargain we were. And I think one other thing that is probably affecting people's perceptions is they don't feel like they're getting what they're paying for. Portland suffered this reputational damage among people who don't live here, people watching Fox News and things like that. Oh, it's terrible there. Well, some of what people say is true. I mean, we have comparable homeless problem to other West Coast cities. Housing is difficult to find here. The schools do not produce good results in Oregon, and especially in the Portland area. And last year they closed for a month because of a teacher strike. So I think people don't feel like they're getting what they're paying for. And if you're asking how you feel about the economy, well, I think some of that creeps in, the general malaise.
Yeah, I mean, but again, like, that's not the economy, right? Those are quality of life things that are outside of it that are coloring the way that people feel about the money that they're making, the jobs that they have, the state of the city.
Yeah, they're internalizing it. People used to talk about a second paycheck here. Come to Portland, come to Oregon, you get a second paycheck. One is what you get for in cash, and one is what you get for living here. And now it sort of feels like there's a tax on living here because of the things that aren't going well.
So
and
the lifestyle tax is going up. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. Everything that we thought we had going for us has now turned against us. Yeah. And we're having a hard time overcoming those issues.
Yeah. Something else that was in that polling by DHM research, a couple things jumped out at me, talking about where people are in their careers and how that sort of influences their trust in the economy. And we mentioned the cost of buying homes versus renting, whether people are renting or own homes. It seems like there's some difference there as well. We talked a little bit about demographics earlier. Can we see a demographic difference in how people feel about the economy based on where they are?
100%, yeah. And that's, we see that again and again, but the DHM survey put that in stark relief. If you only have a high school diploma or less, and you participate in their poll, 2/3 of people say that they rate their personal financial situation as poor. But among those with a college degree, just 24%, less than half as many, rate their financial conditions as poor. So there's a real divide in that based on the education you've gotten and the opportunities that are available to you. And then you see the same question you asked about demographics. Ask men if their financial situation is poor, and 39% of men told DHM, yeah, that's true. But 51% of women said their finances were poor. And I think we see that in polling, national polling too. Men and women are looking at the world differently right now.
That's interesting to me. I mean, is that specific to today? It sounds like it's not specific to Oregon. Has that divide always been there? Or
I can't speak into the financial situation, but I think men and women are experiencing the economy differently because I think there are more single parents and women are doing more of that work. And even if you're in a married couple, women are doing more of that work.
Yeah.
And so they're picking up more of the strain, and they're internalizing the economic stress that they're under.
Yeah.
But there's one other thing, that the biggest thing that's affecting how people view their own finances is whether they own their home or whether they rent it.
Yeah. I mean, that if you bought a home 15 or 20 years ago and it's, gone up 40% in value, you have a different outlook on your finances than if you're trying to jump into the market for the first time right now, which is next to impossible.
And your mortgage payment is pegged to the price of your home of what it was 20 years ago and the interest rate that you were paying. But with rent, you can't control that. Rent's up to your landlord and the market and economic forces you can't control. And so you are more vulnerable.
Well, I think it is surprising that we've made it this far into a conversation about the economy and not said the word election yet. 2 months away, pretty big deal coming up. And I think that is one of the reasons that the economy is on a lot of people's minds, is because we have candidates just sort of hammering the state of the economy into our head right now. How do you think that people's perception of Oregon's economy are going to impact how they're voting in the fall, both in terms of federal elections and especially in terms of local races?
Well, I'm not a political scientist. I may get over my skis here, but here's how I think about it. I think the economy is a big deal in how people vote. People do internalize how they're feeling about things generally, and it's reasonable to think that that's also going to affect how they vote. The status quo typically wants a strong economy, and whether our economy is strong or weak now, people don't feel great about it. That's got to hurt incumbents. That's got to hurt the status quo. But how does that play out in Oregon? It's a solidly blue state. There are a couple tight congressional races where a Democrat or Republican could win it. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out in the city council and the mayoral election.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, does it favor a progressive agenda, which is typically the direction Portland has gone, or does it favor a business slate that might be more concerned about Portland area's relatively high taxes, might be more concerned about creating more job opportunities for people? I have no answer to that. I think it could go either way, but I do think the economy is top of mind to voters when they go to the ballot box.
Yeah.
It's just that people may not have a single solution to that. People may have different ideas.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how a lot of the issues that people are facing in the city right now, as we talked about before, there is an economic component to it, but a lot of it is also just about how we feel about the city, which is funny because we're actually doing an episode tomorrow talking about the vibes and the election. So keep an eye out for that.
Well, economics is vibes. It is a psychological.
Economics is vibes. Okay.
It is a social science. And so how people feel about the economy is a psychological thing as well as being a quantitative one.
Yeah.
So I think that's a genuinely valid way to look at it.
All right, Mike, can I give you my economist joke?
Yes.
Okay. How many economists does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Let's hear it.
7 plus or minus 10. It's not bad, right?
Not bad.
Not bad.
It's saying the same thing as a two-handed economist.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. There's a wide range of outcomes.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for all your reporting and for taking the time to try and help us unravel this. This is one of the most complex topics I think we can cover, and I do feel like I know a little bit more about it now. So thank you.
Well, excellent. I'm really glad if that's so. Good talking to you, John.
Well, that's all for us today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening, though. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend about it or leave us a rating or a review? Claudia will be back tomorrow with a lot more from around the city. But until then, see you at Slim's.